Hello, everyone. My name is Shekinah Williams, and this is my oral presentation on the topic of sexual abuse of children. So, in my presentation, I'm going to be talking about, again, sexual abuse of children within the United States. Unfortunately, this is a topic that is discussed a lot. We have a lot of children that are, abused by close family members or friends of the family, sometimes strangers. And, we hear it in the news, we see it on TV in our communities, but there are a lot of children whose stories we never hear about. Um, and it's sad that we have so many high cases of children that are abused. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that in this presentation. So my introduction to the issue is child abuse is any interaction between a child and an adult or another child in which the child is used for the sexual stimulation of the perpetrator and an observer and or an observer. Sexual abuse can include both touching and non-touching behaviors. Non-touching behaviors can include voyeurism, trying to look at a child's naked body, exhibitionism, or exposing the child to pornography. Children of all ages, races, ethnicities, and economic backgrounds may experience child abuse, sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse affects both girls and boys in all kinds of neighborhoods and communities. I retrieved this information from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And a lot of times, people think that only children in low poverty neighborhoods or children of color are sexually abused, and that is not the case. You can be a white, black, Asian child, come from a two-family household, a single-family household, rich or poor, and experience sexual abuse. A lot of times these children, I'll talk about a little bit more, they either become overachievers at times where they dive into their schoolwork, they dive into extracurricular activities, or sometimes they act out behaviorally. They become criminals, they become physically aggressive. In my next point, I write that most children that are sexually abused demonstrate emotional and or behavioral concerns as a result. These children do not have another outlet, and the only way that they know how to escape from the abuse that they are receiving is, like I said, either overachieving, underachieving, or behaviorally. And then we start to see a lot of mental illness start to surface, such as depression, anxiety, self-harming behaviors. Some of these children will then want to commit suicide. A lot of them, like I said, become depressed or anxious. They don't really know if the next adult in their life is going to abuse them. They don't really know who they can trust. They struggle with that battle of who can they tell this to? They feel like they do not have an outlet. And then the physical aggression and oppositional behaviors kick in, and that mostly happens in our boys. They start to struggle with, their sexuality. Do they feel as though, now that this sexual abuse has happened, that they are not man enough, that they are weak, that they allowed someone to do this to them, especially if the perpetrator is a male. How come they weren't able to defend themselves, even in a young age, or why wasn't anyone there to defend them? Nearly 700,000 children are abused in the United States. 90% of children who are victims of sexual abuse, they know their abusers. Only about 10% are strangers. So a lot of times children can be abused by their caregivers or their parent, a family friend, an uncle, an aunt, a babysitter, someone that is very close to them. And during the time of this abuse, the child is sometimes, given a little extra, loved on a little bit more, maybe a little bit more ice cream, a little bit more time watching TV. Sometimes these children are put down at a young age. They're what we call groomed, where they are taught that, they're not worth anything, or, this is the type of love that I have to give you. This is how I show love to you. And they start to accept that. and sometimes they are abused by more than one family member. I believe in either week 2 or 3, we watched a video clip about from the point of view of children that were sexually abused, and one of the adults described how they were abused by more than one family member within their family, and it was whatever happens in this house stays in this house. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that is the thought process for a lot of the children that were abused, where they were told that, if someone in the home did something to you, that it stays within the home. And then these children were never able to get the help that they needed. And then as adults, what happened to them as a child trickled into their adulthood. The trauma, not being able to build positive relationships with other adults or people of the opposite sex. Healthy relationships were not able to be formed because they were not able to receive the help that they needed as a child to process through the trauma that they experienced. And then again, as they became older, some became criminals. There are a lot of criminals who experienced sexual abuse as children. And then because of that, again, with the acting out, the defiant behaviors, they ended up engaging in criminal activities and getting themselves into a lot of trouble. Again, their children are fearful of reporting the sexual abuse because they're worried about getting in trouble. They were groomed, and they would believe that no one would protect them. No one would believe their side of the story. Adult women who were sexually abused as children are twice more likely to suffer from depression than children than women that were not abused. That's that mental illness piece starting to surface due to the abuse as a child. And in reviewing some literature in regards to sexual abuse, I found out that the first agency developed to protect children was the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in 1875. In this same article, there were a lot of key points, and it was a good article to read because it also talked about different laws that were in place to protect children, but there was no like service, like how we have our Department of Child and Protective Services. This was like that first type of service that was formed in order to help these children on another level, opposed to the laws. But prior to this agency, children were not really protected. Again, there were a few cases where, parents or caregivers or people might have been prosecuted. But in 1642, a Massachusetts law gave local authorities the right to remove children from their parents who didn't train up their child properly. They didn't really discuss too much what that train up was, but I guess if the child was not educated or fed or clothed properly, then they were allowed to remove them. In 1809, for example, a New York shopkeeper was convicted for assaulting a slave and her 3-year-old daughter. So there was also another piece in this article where it discussed about a mom who was accused of killing her child. She was accused of killing her child, but she was not found guilty because of insanity. So that also was something that happened a lot back then because people did not see that, abusing their people sexually abusing or just abusing children in general, that you had to be crazy. So they automatically were deemed insane for the most part. And as more and more children were becoming to be more and more abused, then it started to gain attention nationally and statewide, and then nationally wide, and then all of these different programs and organizations started to be put into place to help protect these children from these types of abuse. And then the umbrella was just child abuse, and then it started to trickle down to different types: sexual abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, neglect, maltreatment. So all of these different types of domains started to function and come out from this one umbrella of abuse because they all require different levels of services. And in order to treat each child for their individual type of trauma, we had to break down the different types of abuse. So therefore we can get in there and trying to figure out exactly how to help these children. So this is just a list of a few different types of services that I came across. Each state has their own type of service in regards to handling child abuse, sexual abuse. Of a child. In New York, there is the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. Every state has one of these. So I just put that one up from New York. And then there's also the Child Welfare League of America. That's a national website that you can go onto to find different types of services for children in different states. So that website is very helpful, as well as the Children's Bureau and Office of Administration for Children and Families. This is also very helpful as well for children and families, because even though a lot of the times these children are abused from people that may not, that they know, it's not necessarily always a caregiver, and parents and caregivers also need support in how to help their child process through the trauma that they've experienced, and also to help the families process through that. Sometimes families or the caregiver may feel like, how did they miss these? How did they miss the signs? How did they not know that their child was being abused? What could they have done differently? How did they let this person around their child? So many different things run through parents' minds when they find out that their child has been abused, that these services right here can also help these families as they transition and get through this traumatic time in their life, and also help their child, because they're going to need that support to be able to process what happened, and to also try to move forward in life and gain back some type of functionality as to what happened. So these are just a few services that are in place. Another one is Prevent Child Abuse of America, another national website and telephone number, that an email address that you can go on to again find these services in any state. So I felt like those right there, the national ones, are definitely very helpful, because then you'll be able to trickle down into your state and see exactly where you can provide resources for these families. There are also therapeutic services, outpatient therapists that specialize in trauma for children. Since the social service field has definitely expanded, and now we have therapists that specialize in different areas and domains, then it makes it easier to navigate and find someone that specializes in helping a child with sexual abuse, trauma, and different types of techniques that can help this child. So, in terms of interventions on the micro, meso, and macro level, I broke those down. So for the micro level, on this level as a social worker, this will be addressing the emotional and behavioral concerns of the child, more of an individual type of level. So for this, I would definitely like to use motivational interviewing. I think it's important to build a positive therapeutic relationship with the child, because children, especially those who have been abused, um, have a type of traumatic experience. They might not be so trustworthy to just come out and have an open dialogue conversation with me, especially because I'm an adult. I could trigger anything inside of a child unbeknownst to me. So I think it's very important to kind of ask those kind of questions in a child way. So therefore it's easier to kind of slowly build that rapport and that relationship with them. I think it's very, very important that my approach is that I'm careful with my approach, excuse me, because it is very sensitive. And like I said, I don't want to become a trigger. And I think another intervention that I can use on this level would also be cognitive behavioral therapy. I want to focus on the child's thoughts of the sexual abuse and how it affects their behaviors. If I have a child who used to be very outgoing and always playing and drawing and coloring, and then now all of a sudden they don't interact, they keep to themselves, they seem to be very quiet now, then I want to know exactly what it is that they're thinking about and how it affected their behaviors, and that shift in how they now engage with people around them. On the meso level, I want to focus on the family and the community of this child. I want to do assessment in regard to their background, where they came from, their upbringing, how they were raised, the type of household that they were brought up in, if they were an only child. I also want to find out about the family's background. If their abuser was, let's say, a family was a close family member, was that family member abused